So I just want to thank Dr. Kate Cherrell for coming along this evening to chat with us here for the Unknown World segments on the Days of Horror channel. So how are you, Kate?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
We are good, aren't we? We are very good. As we spoke just off camera, so to speak, this is my wife, Victoria. This is the first time she's took part in an Unknown World interview segment. It's usually been me on my own.
Hang on, I've had my foot problems.
She's had her foot problems. I don't know if you've known,
Oh,
but she had an operation on the foot and she had a bunion removed, so she couldn't get up the steps into the attic where we are now. So this is where we are. So yeah, so this is Vicky's first time with the interviews, but we just want to thank you so much for coming along tonight, because we do know you're a busy person.
not at all. Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Right. We've got some questions, but like I said to you off recording, there's nothing difficult. It's all stuff you've probably heard before.
Okay.
I don't know what Vicky's wrote. She doesn't know what I've wrote. So this might catch us two out at the same time here. So do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Before you start with questions, what about telling our audience what actually Kate does?
Yeah, I mean, what I normally do as well, people will have seen this, Kate, but at the start of these, I usually do an intro for the special guests without them knowing. But it's all good. It is all good, trust me.
Better be.
So people will have watched the intro. But yeah, I mean, for those who perhaps don't know too much about you, could you sum up your career to date? And then we'll get into the early beginnings shortly.
Right.
But
I have quite an odd career. I'm a writer, a researcher, an academic, a paranormal historian is kind of the banner that I'm running under at the minute. So I write commercially and publicly as well, and academically about all manner of spooky things. My specialism is really like 19th century spiritualism, but like all of us, I have little niche interests off that as well, like pathologizing mediumship, and I've blogged about graves, burials, churchyards, unusual history, dark history, since 2017 under Burials and Beyond. So I do a lot of that, and I've done some bits on TV over the last few years, and keep doing the publishing, keep doing the TV, and just enjoying my spooky little way in life, really.
Well,
and the goth look.
Yeah, I haven't worn colour since the millennium. This is about as bright as you get me. Yeah.
I love that style anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about your career there. You've summed it up quite nicely. And you said it started around about 2017.
Well, that's when I started my blog. So I started my blog when I did my first master's degree, because I was always going, well, since childhood really, and then since I had a digital camera, whenever I went anywhere and I saw a churchyard, anywhere where there were burials, I just obsessively took pictures, but with no real purpose in mind. It was just my own interest. And then I'd have all these floppy disks and then CDs that were just full of notes and pictures, a bit like a serial killer, but a bit more cultured. So I'd have loads of these. And then I got to the stage where I thought, look, you need to do something with them. So then I started writing about them, started blogging, and then it was anything weird that sort of piqued my interest. So I've been writing about that sort of thing for donkey's years now.
Because it's strange, because like I said, we've done a little bit of research. We're not stalkers, but we like to look into people do for these interviews. But we also read that I think you started working in a cemetery, didn't you? So I pique your put your interest into what you do now, or is that?
No, that was long after that. Well, really, my interest with graves, I can trace back to childhood, to very young childhood, when I was a toddler and a baby, really. My granddad, who was the same granddad that got me into sort of paranormal, UFOs, UAPs, things like that, he had a huge influence on me, and every week, twice a week, he'd put me in the pram, and then later I'd walk with him, and we'd go to the local cemetery. We'd do our laps, we'd tend to the family graves, we'd talk about it, and then we'd go on down the seafront and back home, because I'm from Grimsby, Thorpes originally. So we did that, and so I was just very used to being around places of burial, places of rest, and then over the years that interest developed into extending that into what about the chapels, what about the churches themselves, and it got quite ecclesiastical. And then God, how many years ago now? Must be, it was a few years after I started Burials and Beyond, the opportunity for a duty manager at quite a large cemetery. And so I thought, why not just be the biggest cliched goth in the world? You know, do that while you're doing, you know, all this other academic stuff. And at the time I was dabbling in bat work and field ecology as well. So it was very busy, but quite funny time in my life to look back on. But that opened up my mind to sort of the inner workings of a cemetery, not just how you'd visit, you know, as a walker. So I actually saw how things came up.
So did the paranormal part of you come from your personal experience with your sister?
It's a bit chicken and egg really when it comes to my interest in the paranormal, because my granddad introduced me to ghost stories, and he used to have this, I've got it kicking around somewhere, this paranormal encyclopedia that he'd put on my knees when I was on his lap when I was little, because I couldn't read. He'd read me the little bits out and I'd look at the glossy pictures, and I think that certainly left an imprint. So it was ghost stories and so forth. But then in, was it 2001 to 2004, I've got a very small family, so I've spent a lot of time growing up staying with my grandparents and staying with my sister. And my sister moved into this really normal post-war semi in Grimsby. It's the least spooky looking place you could ever imagine. And that ended up being kind of a hotbed of very, very extreme, very unpleasant paranormal experiences. Now, as weird as I am, my family aren't. They're very normal, they're very cheerful people. So this wasn't kind of like a familial interest, but now I've started talking a bit more about that. Started doing talks, and I'm writing up a manuscript now. That I would say, as much as it opens me up to criticism, that was a house that had a poltergeist attached to it. So digging through those experiences as a child and digging through my sister's experiences as an adult has been quite an interesting process. But that both encouraged my paranormal interest and put me off for a few years as well, because it wasn't pleasant. I wish it was all Ghostbusters and Stay Puft, but it was at the time it was incredibly unpleasant. I
was gonna say, because you said your sister really was scared.
No, she was terrified. It's not like, you know, when you see these things on telly or these films where people are in these houses and they're saying, we're not going to leave, it's our house, and they put up with it for years and years. It was quite the opposite of that. They got in the house, they sunk all their money into it, and they started redecorating, and that's when everything kicked off. And there was everything. There was apparitions, there was lights, there was things thrown, and it was when it got to the violence end of things where my sister and her husband had to move downstairs. I moved out completely, and they were just trying to get rid of the house, because it got to the stage where we were so scared about what would happen upstairs. And you know, my sister was in a medical profession, my brother-in-law was a gas engineer. They weren't daft people, you know, and they were kind of primed for ticking off any nonsense. But it got to the stage where we'd go to the toilet in pairs and have the door open just in case anything happened. And that doesn't really fit into the horror story identikit poltergeist experience.
I think if Danny Robbins ever does a celebrity uncanny, I think you're going to be one of the first on his list, surely.
Celebrity. Oh, thank you. I'll take celebrity. That's very generous.
So, you know, I mean, obviously your career's gone from strength to strength over these years. I mean, that's without a doubt. But how do you kind of make that leap from, like I said, working in a cemetery maybe to where you are now, actually appearing on TV, the TV work?
Publishing.
You know, publishing books. I mean, was it a natural thing to happen, a natural, organic?
Was it hard work to get where you are with your passion?
Yeah, definitely. I think the best advice I've ever been given is actually is to treat yourself like a shire horse, which doesn't sound particularly pleasant, but wear blinkers. Don't look. It's so easy, especially when you're doing something like, you know, when you've got something that you're putting out as a product,
Yeah,
or you're
yeah.
putting out like an aspect of media, it's so easy to go, oh, what are they doing? Or what are they doing? Why are they doing that? Why am I not getting that achievement? Why am I not
Yeah.
doing that?
Yeah.
So just to do what feels right for you, be consistent and work. So if you find pleasure and satisfaction in your own work, then just the momentum of it will take you to new and interesting places,
Yeah,
whether or
yeah.
not that's TV, radio, books, whatever it is. So I've never gone into anything expecting anything. I've always just wanted to make something that I'm proud of, that's something that
Yeah.
interests me. I know it sounds a bit demeaning to myself, but I'm a bit like an excitable toddler at all times. So if I find a story or like a ghosty experience, I won't just go, oh, that's interesting. I'll pick it up and be like, look at this. This is so cool. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
See? So yeah,
I'm like that with Vicky, because like I said, we at the start we cover like early crime stories, and they don't always have to be famous people. You know, most of them are generally just people who you've never heard of before, but they have made the local papers back in 1800s, early 1900s. And I said to Vicky, "I've looked at this. What, you know? Do you think this is a good story?" And then when I get into it, we go out with like the other day we went out, we did a video which is going live tonight. I must play it back about 30 times with Vicky. Does it look good? Does this look all right? What about this bit? What about that? And Vicky will say, no, put this in, take that out, add that, do this. You know, and that constantly, what about this? What about this? I'm exactly the same when it comes to it. I'm not saying our videos are perfect by any means, but just like you said, you've got to just concentrate and then absorb yourself in it, haven't you, really?
Exactly. Yeah, perfection doesn't exist. And if some opportunities come, they come. If they don't, they don't. There was another thing that a friend of mine who works in the media in performance said to me, that one day he was complaining to a friend who'd been very, very successful, and said, you know, I think I've missed the boat. And she laughed at him and said, there's always another boat. So I think that's a good thing to dwell on. It's like, when people say, oh, I'm 40, I'm 50, I haven't written a book. It's like,
you're
not
right.
dead.
Yeah.
Write it. There's nothing stopping you, and just don't compare yourself to other people. Nothing can be gained from that. Absolutely nothing.
I've kind of done it a few times, haven't I? I've said, oh, we should have done this 10 years ago. We should have done it 15 years ago. But like you said, we're still here, so do it now. It doesn't matter how old we are. If you're passionate about something, just do it. That's the best way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes opportunities come up. You can take them, you can dismiss them. Just do what's right in your mind, what feels good for you then.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, obviously, I came across you myself. Well, I think we both did at the same time. Realistically, we love Jack Osbourne. We love Jack Osbourne. When we obviously watched The Homecoming, you were great in that, by the way.
Thank you.
I loved that, and obviously then we did the research on it, and I loved the actual fact that you said, oh, where is that? I wrote it down somewhere. No. Oh,
got pages of notes.
It's okay. I'll have a quick sip.
It was a comment that you made before doing the show. Oh, that was it. I read about the fact that before you actually appeared on the show, you straight away said something about, is anything going to be faked? Love that.
Yeah.
Because there's so much fakery now on telly.
Yeah.
That straight away. It's a good thing to have that straight away. You weren't bothered about working with Jack Osbourne. To me, you wanted to make sure nothing was going to be fake.
Yeah. I think that it's a tricky thing to talk about when it comes to paranormal media, because it's still got entertainment at the heart of it.
Yeah.
And so I think I acknowledge I was incredibly fortunate to drop onto that project with the right people at the right time. And so I like that there was this thread of integrity through the whole thing, not just from Jack, but from the whole crew and like the whole production team.
Yeah.
It was just the most lovely unit of people who had never made paranormal TV before. They weren't known for doing paranormal stuff.
It was all new to all of you.
Yeah, so they approached it in a different way. They didn't see it as, right, we need a scare here, we need a scare here, we need a sound effect, we need this. It was very much like, let's see what happens. We don't know this world, but we're going to present it accurately, and we're going to still make it compelling. And I think, hopefully, it goes to prove that people can still have experiences that they believe to be paranormal or unexplained. and they don't have to be manufactured in the edit or
Yeah.
manufactured to a point of exploiting people.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think there's the place for every type of paranormal media in
I
the
think
UK.
if you say it's paranormal for entertainment purposes, it's different. But when they're actually going in saying this is paranormal,
Yeah, I mean, it's the paranormal's always going. This is why we get so many arguments and so many. It's like EastEnders, isn't it? The paranormal world. There's just constant fractions of people
Yeah.
falling out. But
Yeah.
I think again, it comes down to the same thing: make something that you're comfortable
Yeah.
making, and if you're not hurting anyone,
Yeah.
then go for it. You know, I will happily have on. I'm awful for it. I'll have the telly on all the time. I'd probably get so much more done if I didn't. But I'll have, you know, Discovery Plus on. I'll have Really on. I'll have, you know, Blaze playing, and I'll watch everything while I'm tidying up, while I'm typing something up, and I can enjoy it all. But they're all from very different parts of the paranormal pie chart. So yeah, I think there's a place for everything. But certainly, I was very fortunate that my first proper foray into TV was such a kind one, such an encouraging atmosphere. Yeah.
Going back to your career now, slightly away from TV, I was watching one of your recent uploads just today, and it was the sensuality of séance.
Yeah.
I love that. I thought it was brilliant. Honestly, I really did that. And I've got pages of notes now. I won't go through all of them, but I just thought it was brilliant. So I wanted to get into that a little bit more, because is that kind of where you feel like you are now with your career? Because I think you're doing, or have you done a PhD in?
I've done a PhD, yeah, and I'm now doing a secondary master's.
Right.
In 19th century.
Right.
So I'm a sucker for punishment, really.
Well, I was watching it today, and like I said, I've got pages of notes on that, because I love the idea of where it all began. You know, seances, mediums or mediumship. You know, the use of the Ouija boards, how the Victorians looked at death. So when I was watching that today, I got absorbed in it. And like I said, I've got pages of notes here. But I mean, obviously, we don't want to get too in depth with it, because obviously we could be here for hours. But do you think there's been a massive change from the Victorian period when it all began? All the sits around tables, like fingers and hands touching for the energy. Do you think there's been a massive change in 200 years, would you say, to what we do now when it comes to that kind of thing?
Not necessarily. If anything, at the minute, I feel like there's a bit of a resurgence. So if we take modern spiritualism roughly as beginning in 1848 with the Fox sisters, then the earliest spiritualist groups, the earliest investigators, all of that were kind of, they laid out the templates. Obviously, they're built on pre-existing ideas of mesmerism and so forth. But in terms of investigation and seance and so forth, they built the chassis of what paranormal investigators and also spiritualist churches use today. So, like you say, that's where you get table tipping and spirit boards, things like that, and also plenty of other things that we don't really see in modern paranormal circles, like slate writing and we don't see manifestations so much. It's a bit of a bold crack if you want to have a go at that, or maybe trance lectures. So I'm seeing more and more event-wise, more people advertising these special evening events that are traditional or authentic Victorian seances. And it's just the wording of that I'm endlessly fascinated by, because every single interpretation of authentic and traditional is completely different. There is no such thing really as an authentic Victorian seance, mainly because most of them were based really on manipulation, and like the sensuality of seance based on manipulation of the senses. And that's what makes it interesting, but it's also what makes it incredibly fallible. So I think the more we're seeing traditional Victorian seances and this kind of extreme pushback to paranormal tech, which can now reach like thousands of pounds for an ITC device that will spew out a couple of words, on an investigation. There's warring factions again, pro-tech, and anti-tech. So I'm thinking maybe with the anti-tech, that will go full circle, and we'll go back to exclusively table tipping, maybe even more so. Maybe it'll be more extreme, and we will have.
I mention it because, so we've been to the likes of 30 East Drive recently. We've been to the ancient Ram. We've done a couple of other so-called haunted locations, and I often wonder if it wasn't for the Victorians and the obsession with death and spirits, ghosts, paranormal, we probably wouldn't be doing what we do today if it wasn't for them. The way we do things, if that makes sense. And like you said, we've got the more modern equipment, but it's similar to what they did, 200, 250, 200 years ago. And that's why I was wondering if you think it had changed much, but it is.
I think it's still thriving, but under a different face. And I think maybe now we've moved away from wanting to direct on paranormal events, like you say, when you go to the ancient realm or 30 East Drive, something like that. Most people aren't going there with a view to consistently communicating with spirits that they've maybe spoken to on several occasions prior. They're maybe not going to try and talk to a deceased loved one like you would at a spiritualist church, perhaps. So I think maybe the intent has changed a bit, because now we're very focused on entertainment, but that isn't to say that entertainment wasn't a big driving force in the 19th century either. So it's just we've got different clothes and plug sockets, but we're basically the same.
So what? And again, this is what I mean. I'm watching this video today, and I always find it a fascinating. I always think to myself, a fascinating aspect of Victorian life is what was the morbid curiosity and interest in death back then. Because I think they call them death photographs, don't they, where children or family members and have photographs taken with the loved ones who have passed away. And there was this big fascination of death back in Victorian
You wouldn't
life.
do that today, would you?
No, this is what I mean. It's kind of loosely linked, isn't it, with mediumship, seances? You know what I mean?
I think it's certainly the way the Victorians processed death and mourning wasn't necessarily. I think so often we hear the Victorian celebration of death, and the Victorians sort of revelled in their mortality. And while that's true to an extent, I think it was just a very different relationship that was on show. So, say this is one of my obsessions. I'm lecturing on this quite regularly. That different classes had different relationships with death, and throughout the different decades of the 19th century, those relationships would differ. So, even just relating to access to healthcare, so the mortality rates for families who would live in built-up urban areas would be far more extreme than those who maybe lived in the countryside or were middle class and had better access to affordable healthcare, which is kind of the same that we see in lots of countries today. But then wherever that individual died, their relationship with burial, memorialization, and grieving would be entirely dependent on their circumstances, their class circumstances, their economic circumstances. But I think today, when we look back on the 19th century and we look back on how Victorians mourned and how they grieved, we kind of see them as this other. They're not human. They look like us, but they're not, because they're in these great big, crepe and bombazine affairs, and they're very outwardly mourning, and that goes against what we've been conditioned to feel about. Stiff upper lip, back on with it, get a self-help book, deal with that grief. Whereas perhaps maybe outwardly displaying that grief and processing that in a different way was a healthier way to deal with things, but also there was a far greater massive industry around funerals, memorialization, and mourning. But a lot of the way we get a lot of our information today on the Victorians is really through like clickbait and social media. And so a lot of half-truths and mistruths get circulated about the Victorians that make them appear like they were that they were horrifically morbid, that they were
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much getting someone as soon as they died, chuck them next to you in bed and go, all right, lads, let's take a picture. It's like that's not really how it
Yeah,
happened. But
yeah,
yeah, post-mortem photography, the way it's banded about, you'd think every single person who'd
yeah,
ever set foot in front of a camera was dead.
yeah,
The way it's put on online,
yeah.
whereas
True.
I think a lot of those narratives have been pushed for financial gain, for selling Victorian carte de visites and daguerreotypes,
Yeah.
ambrotypes, selling them an inflated price by saying this person looks a bit odd. It's because they're dead. 40 quid, 400 quid.
Yeah.
Whereas in reality, the Victorians didn't conceal that someone was dead in these photos. They weren't standing up the dead. That's a complete myth. They weren't weeping into little lacrimatory bottles and collecting their tears. It's another myth. They didn't use black saucers to have their cake on while they were mourning. It's another myth. And all of it is to feed this kind of skewed idea of how horrible the Victorians were, but also a bit of cash in someone's back pocket if ever they get a black plate and want to spend it, want to sell it for 40 quid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you got a question?
You talked about your granddad a lot, and he the UFO part. You don't actually study UFOs, do you? From what I know, you talk about paranormal, but you don't talk about UFOs as such.
No, I don't write about UFOs and UAPs as much as ghosts and hauntings and burials and so forth. And I think a lot of that, I mean, I've been to quite a lot of UFO conferences and I read a lot of any UFO literature I can find. I've got a mini library of about 200, 300 books to do with UFOs. So I spend a lot of time alone. I wonder why that is. So it is another obsession, but I've often felt like that sort of field is rather more. It feels more into a scientific field that I'm not comfortable speaking about in depth. But saying that, I have written quite a lot commercially. So for magazines, for newspapers, and for bookazines and larger compendiums, I've written a lot on UFOs and like government cover-ups and different government, investigative cases and things like that. So I've written quite a lot about it that has been published, but I don't put too much online about it, which seems completely counterproductive.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's I just couldn't find much about that from you. Yeah, when I was starting.
Yeah, but I like I said, my granddad was hugely into it, so I've got all of his Roswell books. And it's so easy to get obsessed with Roswell, isn't it? So that sort of thing kind of kick-started, and then went into Nazca lines and more sort of things that I have been purportedly influenced by ancient and alien civilizations. That will always interest me.
Yeah.
Have you got another one?
We're flipping here between different things, aren't we? I was going to ask you about going back to the mediumship and that side of it, because I really do find it fascinating. I really do. Like anything, I mean, you touched upon it about senses, individual senses going into these places, and how mediums, even to this day, I think they kind of, there is some fakery involved. We can't get away from that. And they'll pick up on the slightest thing, won't they, and build a narrative around it. So it could be a little ticking somewhere, or it could be somebody's necklace with an initial on it, letter C for Chris or whatever. And they pick up things. Would you say you've ever encountered what you would class as proof that a medium is real and is not fakes anything? Have you had any personal experience where you can actually think, how did he know, or how did she know that?
Yeah, I have on a couple of occasions, although this sounds really like I'm a right negative Nelly. I'm always have more interest in the mediums that are clearly rubbish.
Right.
So if someone says, right, there's this book, it's a 1980s paperback, it's the autobiography of the world's worst medium, I'm like, right, that's going to be my new obsession for the next 6 weeks. I'll be reading nothing else. But in day-to-day life, I've worked with a couple of mediums. There was Sian, who was on Haunted Homecoming. She's
Yeah.
a female Welsh medium. She was fantastic. I've seen her work a couple of times, and sometimes she's dropped onto things that have been, I've no idea how she got
Yeah.
there. And also, I recently did some work with another medium called Andy Moore. He was very, very good. And I'm fascinated by these little pockets of mediumship, but
Yeah.
I'm generally quite terrible at public events, because as soon as I hear someone latch onto something, I want to pin them down and go, right, tell me more. Let me get my notepad. How do you know this? How do you know this? I think because I spend so much time looking at fraudulent mediumship in the 19th and early 20th century, I'm a total buzzkill at a lot of these events. Could be the best medium in the world, and I'm there going, this is fantastic. I will be obsessed with you, but I need to know everything. What did you have for dinner? What did you know about this person? What are they wearing? So
I was
yeah.
like, I mean, I was reading today as well about like going back into the early days with, you know, Victorian side of it, and, you know, some of the debunkers, if you will, if you want to call them a debunker, and I've got the names here, like Harry Houdini,
Yeah.
Harry Price, just the two big names I can think of, who would call out the fakery, wouldn't they? And they'd try to find how these people were doing what they were doing and conning the public. You know,
Yeah, I'd say Houdini was far more stringent
yeah,
and far more hardline in his debunking. Harry Price was very much a career ghost hunter,
yeah,
shall we say? I don't think Houdini and him would have been the best of friends, but I would like to be, you know, told otherwise, because I would love that buddy cop movie, you know, of the pair of them. But yeah, a lot of the debunkers, certainly in the 19th century, so kind of prior SPR, I find very
yeah.
interesting, because a lot of the earliest debunkers, like Houdini, were magicians.
Mm.
So it was when magicians started recognizing their own tricks being used in these burgeoning spiritualist circles that they either went to say, oh, that looks lucrative, I'm going to remarket myself as a medium and get a piece of that pie.
Yeah.
Or they went, no chance, sunshine, you're not doing that. And then they'd go around debunking, writing about, everything was written, really, writing about how so-and-so did this trick, and I'm going to tell you exactly how it was done. So there's a magician called David P. Abbott. It's David P. Abbott and William Marriott. Both were incredibly successful magicians who really took against fraudulent mediumship and fraudulent spiritualist circles, and produced these enormous magazine spreads where they would completely recreate these experiments using well-known magic apparatus or just a mask on a stick, and say, there you are, there's your ghost, I've created it, don't put your money into these pockets, they're conning you. So I find those very interesting. There's been some amazing literature written by these debunkers, and there's also amazing literature written by mediums that people still hold up to be legitimate. So I really enjoy that duality of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I remember before we got married, I went to a local church, obviously near where we live, but there was a guy there, I can't even tell you his name now, but he was one of these who sat there and went into a trance, come out with these weird voices, and they were picking out people from the back of the church hall, if you will. And, oh, you've had a problem with your pet. I think it's a dog, and but this really croaky voice. And I'm sat there straight away thinking, he knows this woman, he knows this young man. You know, straight away. I mean, like you said, I'm like a bit of a buzz killer with it. Vicky's the same. I'll be calling out, no, he knows these, he knows that, he knows about the story, and I'm exactly the same. And I think it's even more so now with the use of technology, and especially all these mediums who maybe do these big palladiums and big shows, and people are paying online with credit cards, aren't they? So straight away, there's a link between the digital age and can they find out information that way, and they just choose somebody out. You know, I'm a proper debunker when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, it's so much. I mean, we really need to think about as well, like you say, our digital footprint and how much information about you is publicly accessible, even on Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, I've had mediums come up to me and tell me that my granddad died in 2015 and I've got a tiny dog. And it's like, wow, really? Of course I've got a tiny dog. She's tiny, white and fluffy. I put her in literally every photo I ever upload.
Yeah, on Instagram today. Well, looking at some pictures with a little dog. I went on your website.
The latest one she's just gone to is the graveyard.
Yeah, so yeah, I forgot what that was. Yeah, your last one you went to, the graveyard in Yorkshire way.
Yeah.
The big monolith.
Woodstone monolith. Yeah,
that's it. That's it. But there was another one in Whitby you've been to, and I saw your little dog on. I've never seen
the chair.
Yeah, it was the chair, the stone chair. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
In Whitby. We've been to Whitby loads of times.
And the little steps.
And the little steps, yeah. But that one with little dog on the chair, because he said the only bum small enough to fit in that chair or something like that. He said.
Yeah, which is useful as a unit of measurement sometimes. But yeah, you see a lot of that, and like you said, with you've paid by credit card to some of these larger events.
Yeah,
I know there's all data protection things that happen with larger events, but that's how a lot of faith healers got caught out.
Yeah,
in the last few decades was because their team were looking down the list, looking these people up, seeing where they lived, what their ailments were, and then feeding it back to the individual who was hosting the event, who would miraculously have this information. And I think, that's when it gets concerning. That's when it goes right from entertainment to exploitation.
I just love the all, like you say. I mean, I'm going back to the first question I should about, has it changed much from talking now? It obviously hasn't, has it? The fakery is there,
really.
The legit are there, and it's just the technology that's changed, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just the technology. Have you got anything else? Another question? I've got a lot. Well,
so if you're on the Victorian,
well,
I'm not.
No, I was going to jump into your interest and your fascination, obviously, with cemeteries. Have you got that as well? See, I don't even know what Vicky's wrote. But yeah, because myself and Vicky, we visited a lot in the last. I mean, we started our channel up during the COVID pandemic, the C word, as we're supposed to call it now, because we sat at home bored, and I said there must be some stories locally we can look into, and that's how we started. But since then, we've visited numerous cemeteries, and I don't know about yourself, but I always find the older ones the more fascinating than the more modern ones.
Yeah.
And we went to one over in Rome, the Verano Monumental Cemetery. That's the English term. There's another word in Italian, but I forgot what it is. But I think that was something like 3,000 years old.
Yeah.
And that really, it was that big, we never actually managed to walk around it fully. It's massive. And we were there for 4 hours? But we had a 2-day visit in Rome, you see. So we had to choose our time wisely to visit other monuments and stuff. We just didn't finish it all, but I loved it. What would you say your favourite cemetery is? Oh, you've wrote this down, have you?
I know my favourite.
Oh God, it changes all the time. I've got to say Cleethorpes. I've got to say Cleethorpes Cemetery.
Cleethorpes?
Definitely
I think sentiment.
What do you got?
Which one did you have?
Highgate.
I do like Highgate. I do. It's oh God. It's if I'm going for sentimental, it's like going, your childhood, your first love. My first love is Cleethorpes Cemetery.
Yeah.
And it's not some great elaborate thing. It's still 19th century, and it's a real mix of old and new, and I've got a lot of family buried there.
Yeah.
And it's where I spent a lot of time in my childhood. But I think because it's not a well-known place, unless you're renting a static caravan, not many people really go to Cleethorpes to look around it. But I think it's a perfect example of wherever you live, if there's a burial ground, you've got stories, you've got social history, you've got local history, you've got mysteries, you've got dramas. It's like a library of people's lives. And I think you still get that in Cleethorpes. You get a lot of stuff, a lot of disasters, a lot of deaths around seafaring, trawlermen. You get, things that are very intrinsically coastal, things that are very Grimsby and very, very Cleethorpes. Yeah. So I like that, because every single burial ground will have clear links to its past and its industry. So I like that. But also I am a perpetual tourist, and any of the Magnificent Seven, the big London Seven cemeteries. Well, I do love them.
Well, we visited Highgate, was it 2 months ago now? February we went down. The first time we've been, and we loved it. We did, didn't we? But there was quite a lot of the paths, the old pathways, as you know. there were a lot of them were shut down because it had rained the night before during the day, and it was just a bit hazardous to get through. And I mentioned this in the video that we did, so it kind of spoilt it for us. But I could understand why they did it. But I'd love to go back. I'd love to go back. It's so old.
Yeah. It is. I think one of the best things Highgate has ever done was actually as a result of lockdown as well. When they started opening up again, they used to only, when I first started going, they only allowed people in on tours. So you'd have a small group you'd have to book on, and then they would take you around an assigned route of certainly of the older cemetery. The other one you were still free to roam around.
Yeah.
So I think just to get people in, but not in groups, they started letting people into Highgate, and since they've continued that, I think that's been fantastic, and it's certainly improved my experience when I've been back. I've had a few negative experiences with Highgate, but I think that's more to do with the running of it now.
Yeah,
and
I think Mick's going to ask you about
that. Yeah.
Well, me personally, I never found a graveyard you have to pay to go into.
Mm-hmm.
I also found, obviously, for people traveling, you're paying for your train ticket, you're paying for accommodation, then you've got to pay to go into this graveyard. And then I am going to say the snobberish part where you can't visit certain people, like i.e., and I will say it, Bob Hoskins, Ian Holmes, they're segregated, but yet you can see George Michael. He's not famous.
It just seemed a bit, I don't know, I mean, obviously, we don't want it to be controversial too much, but
I couldn't get my head around it.
Yeah, because we got there and we paid to go in, and then obviously you have this gate, family members only, where lots of the actors are and the singers were, and I'm like, what's that about? You know,
it felt like, again, it's them and us.
Yeah, but that's kind of how it's always been with Highgate, because when you get these cemeteries that were opened up, you know, after some of the burial acts, you get these like the prime spots where these plots cost so much money. They were impossibly expensive. We could never dream of being buried there. And they were seen as like the ultimate tip-top celeb space because they're separated from the commoners. They're not like us. And so a lot of the grander cemeteries have now reverted to council ownership or trust ownership. And that's generally where you don't get people paying to enter. This is where you get, there's a lot of, which one is it? Kensal Green's free. Some of the other larger ones are free, and they've got cafes and gift shops. I love a gift shop. But certainly things like Highgate, they're technically a business. I think they're technically.
It felt like that.
Yeah, and still, I think half of Highgate is still accepting. Well, all of it really. They're still accepting burials, but the cost of getting buried there is still incredibly prohibitive. It's still them and us. Because it's central London. It once was on the outskirts. Now it's central London. So when you see these grand mausoleums being built in Highgate now, you're talking millions and millions. To even get them there. So Highgate isn't a representation of a real public cemetery. It's still it's something of its own. But I totally get the frustration there. I've had a few negative experiences there as well, where it seemed like, oh, this is a different law unto itself. But as famous as Highgate is, there are 6 other cemeteries inside London that are just as big, just as dramatic, just as beautiful, and you don't have to pay to get in.
Well, we need to sort them next time.
It was just on the day we went, it was just a bit of frustration because of the rain. We arrived. It cleared up during the day, but obviously everything was a bit too difficult to walk along. Like I said, now all dirt paths to get into the centre, if you will, because that's where all the older headstones seem to have been. We just couldn't get to them.
I haven't been there when any of it's been closed off, but I'd be interested to see which bits have closed off. There's an interesting duality to it. It's like being buried in an objectively public cemetery versus wanting extreme familial privacy when you know people are paying 10, 15, 20 quid to go and visit. So
these are fans who are going there to see them and pay their respects. They're not going there to
deface them or anything.
No, they want to see this famous person who they've idolised all these years.
It's just rules, isn't it? It's just what it is.
Yeah, I think some cemeteries have got that that line perfectly with, okay, we appreciate there's a very famous person here, so let's allow for that,
Mm.
allow for the footfall, but also protect the whatever's there, whether it's a grand mausoleum, whether it's a headstone, whatever. There's probably the best example is Père Lachaise in France, like the biggest cemetery in Paris, and that's where you've got Oscar Wilde, Jim Morrison,
Yeah.
kind of like the great and good. And so obviously they've got loads of visitors, and over the years, some of the headstones, particularly Oscar Wilde's very grand memorial, it became sort of a tradition to leave lipstick kisses all over the memorial, and so that did start to degrade the stone, but they didn't stop people visiting. They put a plexiglass screen around it,
That's
so
right.
people could still visit, but then there would be less damage to the stone. So there is a happy medium, but it takes a lot of consideration. And I don't know that, like, the financial ins and outs of how you'd work that out with the family, say for, like, say people that are buried in Highgate. I don't know what their policies would be, but other cemeteries have managed it.
I think it just comes as a shock to us, really, didn't it?
It did, but when you think about it,
That's what
George Michael's open, clear, massive.
Yeah, never used to be.
All right, and then Bob Hoskins, a little thing hidden around the corner. That didn't make sense. It's not a big grand. But then you've got the Knox guy, Mark Knox, and his is very grand.
Karl Marx.
Karl Marx, but you can see his no problem as well. It just doesn't seem to fit.
As you can tell, she wasn't happy that day.
No, I wasn't happy.
No, there's no right answer to it. There really isn't. It's because there's so many conflicting factors. You've got family, you've got ethics, you've got burial, you've got this very. I hate the word respect. I hate it because it's often weaponized against people, especially in burial spaces. This is disrespectful. Respect is subjective. That's absolute drivel.
Yeah,
but you've got to consider, what all these different factors at play, and exactly where that cemetery is and what the use of that cemetery is. If it's got a gift shop, runs events, and does guided tours, I think maybe you need to set yourself aside from other functioning cemeteries and assess really what the intentions are, a lot of the visitors, and try and lean into that a bit more, even when you're selling the plots. It's like, let people know when they buy the plots what is expected of them.
But it wouldn't put us off. We'd go again.
No, yeah. I mean, speaking of cemeteries as well, like I said, we went to the Verano Monumental Cemetery over in Rome in December. Massive, as I was saying. But I don't actually ask this question really, because it's subjective. But in the UK, we seem to have, I won't call it, well, they're not, that's the wrong word. I wouldn't say they're boring headstones. They're not. All headstones are interesting.
Very similar.
Very similar, aren't they, in nature? But then you go to like Spain, Italy, and you see a lot of these grand monuments, don't you? Like you said about Highgate, they must have cost millions. But it's like, here in the UK, we're a bit more reserved, aren't we, when it comes to death and burials? A bit more, we're black and this, But yet abroad, it's all colourful. It's remembrance. The graves are like always white marble, and everything just looks brighter and cleaner, doesn't it? And pictures of the dead on headstones. I
think that's very cultural. I've seen that in a few London cemeteries, and sparsely in different cemeteries up and down the country. The little images. But as for when you go into modern cemeteries now, all the graves are they're identikit. They're all this very homogenized look. But a lot of that, we think it's kind of, that's just what we do now. That's the norm. We don't have the passion for these elaborate monuments. But it's quite dull, really. A lot of it is because of council regulations. So it's not even a case of people don't want to spend tens of thousands of pounds on a horse made out of marble. It's a lot of these cemeteries will say they have to look like this, they have to fit like this, they have to come from one of our approved masons. So they can't go above a certain height because of like risk of toppling. Really, the amount of cemeteries now you see where older headstones that are 4 or 5 foot tall.
That's right.
If they're not propped up, you'll see loads of them that are just laid flat, and that's by councils because they're regarded as a tipping hazard. Which annoys me, obviously, because you think, well, don't go running through cemeteries and You know, don't you shouldn't be letting your 3-year-old climb on graves anyway.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
then I've been to cemeteries.
Yeah. Health and safety is so big now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then I've also been to cemeteries where I've seen 3-year-olds running around climbing on graves, and I've thought, oh my God,
Yeah.
what are the parents doing? You know, so it's tricky, really. It's a shame. It's a shame, but it's also quite a dull necessity.
Yeah,
But then again, you do see in London some very grand modern graves of people that have had their cars made out of pink granite, stuff like that.
I mean, this is why, because we had a debate walking around Highgate, which is the better, Verano or this, because they're both massive cemeteries. And I still say the Verano one, for me, is my favourite. But Vicky was like, no, Highgate's better, because it's older looking, it feels older.
No, it wasn't that though, was it? It was more the fact that if you go abroad, I can't read the headstone because it's all in foreign language.
It was Italian, she couldn't read it.
I want to read sometimes what's happened.
Yeah.
Or the story. I can't get that abroad.
Yeah, you get that extra level, that sort of personhood.
Yeah.
I think if you've ever visited, or if you've not visited any of the larger cemeteries up in Edinburgh and Glasgow,
we haven't been yet, no.
They are just as good, if not better, than any of the larger Victorian southern cemeteries. They're grand, they're beautiful, they tell stories. You don't have to pay to go in. You know, they're really beautiful, and they have amazing social history behind them. A lot of like military history. They're completely worth it, especially the ones in Edinburgh. There's several stunning cemeteries in Edinburgh.
And like you used to always see on the older ones, the actual street names they used to live on.
Yeah.
That was great.
It's brilliant, especially when you're nosy, because I love looking up on Street View now.
Where we are in the northwest of England, we do have a cemetery in the top end of town where we live. And most of the headstones, and I only spotted it, was it last year, and it actually has the house number where these people used to live, the street name and the house number. And I'm like, it's bizarre, you know, because you don't see that now with modern ones. But back then it was like, this is it. He lived at 31, blah, 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 or 28, so you know what I mean? Yeah. But like I said, they tell stories. They tell stories on their own. And I think, I'm like you, I find them fascinating, graveyard cemeteries. I really do. The older, the better, as I said right at the start. Yeah. So going back to your career, I think we deviated a lot there, didn't we?
Get a little whinge in. Yeah, we're good.
you do a lot of public speaking, which we mentioned right at the very beginning. How can I word this one as well? I presume something like that, it's nerve-wracking, and it takes a lot of preparation.
Yeah.
So how do you cope with that line of your job? How do you cope with that?
Yeah. I've never been someone who's naturally outgoing at all, so it's absolutely ridiculous that this is my job now. So I used to have to like count myself into conversations. I used to have to say 1, 2, 3, no, and speak, because that's the only way I could get the courage up to. And even when I was doing my undergrad, I refused to do any of the group presentations because I couldn't face being in front of people. But I suppose it got to the point where I had the opportunity. A friend was organising some events and said, you know loads about Victorian mourning. You're writing about it now. Do a talk. And I just sort of thought, put your big girl pants on and do it. And then found it incredibly rewarding, because it's not only you're showing your knowledge and showing all this research you've done, but you're also able to enter these discourses with other people as well. So I think the questions at the end are as interesting to me as actually the process of it. But I do a lot of talks on Victorian spiritualism, on Victorian mourning. It's all very 19th century, Victorian cemeteries, and then more niche ones, like I say, like scent of séance, female, young female Victorian mediums, lots of different hauntings, things like that. And in Derby on the 8th of June, I'm doing a talk. Sorry, I'm skipping. In Derby on the 8th of June, I'm doing an obscenely long talk about death and mourning and burial in Dracula. So I'll really be talking about vampire graves, folklore, and sort of this modern folklore that we've attached to Dracula.
Yeah.
So I get giddy.
That's the one we looked at it.
We are away in Spain the week before, and we land back. Do we land back this Saturday? It's the Saturday before you do your talk, because we were talking about getting. Because it's in the afternoon, is it? I think it's 1 o'clock.
Yeah, it's a good time. I like an afternoon talk.
Yeah,
because we were saying today about we land back the week before, so we could actually get down to Derby. And Derby, we don't know that well, but we have been talking to Richard Felix, the old historian guy. We did an interview with him, you see, for this segment, and so he's kindly offered out the jail that he owns for us to spend the night in.
Oh,
so we were thinking, come down and see your talk, and then travel over to Richard Felix's where his jail is, just so we know where it is for when we do go down in the end of July, I think.
Yes.
So it's a win-win, really. Kill two birds with one stone.
Oh, that'd be lovely to see you.
Yeah. But what we'll do, we'll put links down below for the talk you're doing in Derby, so people can go to the website, book tickets, or whatever they need to do.
Thank you.
We'll do all that.
Have you got any more?
Well, I have, and we're going to go back to the old history of cemeteries, and because again, I'm fascinated with how the Victorians mourned the dead and how they buried the dead. And one of them, and I've never seen any yet in the UK, but it's graves with all these different weirdness to them. So you've got bells on some graves, haven't you? Because some people were scared of being buried alive. You had the grave, I forgot, was it in America where he has a glass window?
Yeah.
Why have I got Thomas in my head?
Yeah, it is. I can't remember. I'm thinking of Thomas Lynn Bradford, and that was a spiritualist.
I've got
Thomas something. I can't remember, but I know exactly which grave you mean.
Because he was scared of being buried alive, and he wanted to see the outside world. And I'm thinking, these oddities, I should say, I don't really see them in UK. So no, it was across them.
Yeah, it was a weird period in time where there was this raised concern. It wasn't really representative of the very small number of people that actually were buried alive, but there were certain people who were absolutely terrified at the prospect of being buried alive and waking up in the coffin. So we have this weird little spate of safety coffins, and you can a lot of these are in America. So you have different caskets with viewing windows that would also double up as a way to monitor if someone was breathing in certain instances. But bells. There was even, this is the most American safety coffin there was even one that if the body, I think if he pulled a thing within the coffin, a gun would fire, which is very on brand. But a lot of them were really just patents. Not many of them went into production. They were just sort of ideas. So while there were concerns about being buried alive, and there were horror stories in newspapers that weren't always substantiated, but there were also occasional horror stories of people waking up in coffins with or people opening coffins and there's claw marks on the doors of mausoleums. So it's, when it comes to the numbers that were made and the numbers of people that were buried alive, it's hard to get kind of a real solid number on it, because so many things were exaggerated in the press. But it's fascinating. It's fear breeds industry.
Yeah, it is, exactly. And I don't know, I just must have a darker side to me, because I've always been fascinated in the Victorian side, and this is why I'm glad you agreed to help us tonight and take part in this interview, because there's just something about the Victorian time, the Victorian period, the stories, not just death, but the crimes, the industry, the way we lived.
You love the clothing.
Even the clothing. It doesn't. You don't have to be respectable as in having money. Even the people who were at the bottom end of the ladder, just the way they survived. And I love anything to do with the Victorian side. And obviously, because of the stories that we cover, it goes cap in hand in a way, the darker side of life. People often ask us, what is it about, you're covering stories about that you love, and how can you find something so morbid interesting? And I always say, well, every single person has got this morbid curiosity at some level. We all have it. And I'll argue with anybody who says, "Oh no, it's not. I couldn't." No, everybody's got morbid curiosity at some level.
But when we went to Italy, we went through them.
Like a catacombs.
Yeah, and all the dead flowers. We even said the dead flowers. So they were beautiful.
There's beauty in death and decay. And
Yeah.
I mean, we are getting dark now, aren't we? But yeah.
Compare them to normal flowers, they were more beautiful.
There was all these old flowers. I forgot what a columbarium or columbarium, I think it's called.
That's a columbarium's where you store ashes.
That's right. That's right.
It's in there,
So we went in there, a
flowers.
bit like at Highgate, whereas this was underground, and it was pitch black for the best part of it, and it was quite a walk inside. I know you had this little light at the end of the exit. So we were walking through, but every so often a bit of sunlight would come through, and you see all these decayed flowers, all these old like objects. It was really bizarre, but the souvenirs people left, but they've been there 20, 50, probably 100 years, some of these things. And I said to Vic at the time, even though it's dark, it is a bit morbid, there was a beauty in it.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
And I think this is how the Victorians also, they looked after the dead, didn't they?
They
You know,
did. I think there was less of a fear and there was less
Yeah.
of a repulsion. I think that's maybe because we're so removed from the process nowadays. So
Yeah.
when our loved ones die, they generally die like in hospital or if you've got a relative in a I can't even think of the right word. I just want to say old folks home, in a residential home. There we go. If you've got some, we're very rarely faced with death in our households. We don't really have to interact with the body. Whereas, whereas previously families would have been involved in the whole process of cleaning the body, of preparing them for burial, and then maybe in the 19th century, then they go off to the undertakers if that was in the right era. So I think that's got a lot to do with things. This idea of it's this dirty thing we don't talk about. We remove ourselves from death. So I've been quite fortunate that one of the biggest deaths in my family, it was protracted, but it happened at home. And so I was in a very fortunate position to be there when it happened, to help with cleaning, with preparing. And it was a very cathartic experience. And I think it was a very necessary experience. So it arguably helped me process that death because I was there in its immediacy. That making it sound like I've killed someone. I didn't. It was natural. This is a weird way to confess, isn't it? So I think, I think everyone's got, it's the big question also. It's why are we here?
Yeah.
We can't ever imagine dying because that goes against our consciousness. We can't ever really get our heads around it. So I think, having that greater immediacy with the dying, the grieving process and burial, I think was arguably healthier in the 19th century than it is now. But everyone has got that interest, even if it's someone watching a YouTube documentary on a murder. That's still being interested in humans, in history, and in death. Ultimately, it's kind of intrigues all of us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we got a comment on a video I did 12 months ago about the Manchester air crash that happened over in Spain. It was a flight from Manchester to Spain, and everybody on board was tragically killed. And we've been contacted by there's 3 families that contacted us not too long after we did the video, and they're all thanking us for covering the story, as tragic as it was for their families, because it kept the names alive. We visited like a monument with the names on, to honour the dead. But then somebody left a comment just 2 weeks ago, "Oh, this is a sickening account, very morbid, blah, blah, blah. You've not done any justice for the families." And I'm like, "Well, you've watched it. You've clicked the title. Our channel is called The Days of Horror. It's something horrific that's happened in one day.
And we're keeping history alive.
And like you said, we don't go out to glorify all these stories and, just dramatise them. We tell them as they are. But even this person that came on and said, "Oh, it's just morbid, you shouldn't be doing this, blah, 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 blah." I'm thinking, but you've got that morbid curiosity to watch the video to start with. So we've all got it. We've all got this morbid curiosity, but I suppose it depends on how you act on it, isn't it, really? You know what I mean? It's
exactly, and it's if I mean, I've had very similar things from when I've just written about a memorial somewhere, and it's been very factual. Who was it designed by? Who were the people? These were their lives. This is why it's important to visit it. And I've had very similar things of people saying, "There's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
You know, why are you interested in this? There's something wrong in your head. Is everything all right at home?" And you think, well, yes, it's fine, thank you. But also, it's that, okay, why have you got an issue with this?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's if it's ethically done, if you're not just, I know, exploiting a place, professing to have some kind of powers or contact or conspiracy theory, I think then it's more than important to keep these histories alive. Because so there's a cemetery near me, and you wouldn't know it was a cemetery. There's a cemetery near me where all the headstones have been moved. They've been moved to the outside, and it's just been a bit of a dog walking spot, like a tiny little dog walking spot for decades. And no one's really known why the headstones were stacked. So I looked into it, I wrote about it, and I said, although this is just a dog walking space now, this is still really fascinating. There are beautiful headstones stacked up. This is an important part of social and local history. And then, like a week ago, I suddenly had a spike of about 40,000 views on that particular spot, because someone locally, some local press had picked it up and were saying, this is so important, this is great social history. We should value this around us instead of complaining that another cost has opened up. And so I think that's a better attitude to have about it, is that learning more about these places not only connects you with your environment, but connects you with people.
Exactly.
And ultimately makes you more human and more empathetic. Because you're looking at people's sufferings, you're not hiding them.
I mean, it's like, it's funny you said that about that graveyard, because I was on your website today and I came across the petrol station with the pets. Where the headstones are still there. You know, that's rather to remove them. They might only be pets, but they were loved ones to people's families. You know, but again, it's historical. It's got stories behind it. It's got a meaning behind it. You know, and it might, people, it might be trivial. Oh, it's just a dog or it's just a cat, but it isn't, is it? There's more to it than that.
And it mattered enough for someone to make a headstone and put it there, and it mattered enough to save it for 50 years.
Even though we've got a petrol station there now, the headstones are still there. They've not moved them. You know, I think that was a fascinating one, or even today. Before we go.
Oh, hang on, I've not finished.
Oh, right, sorry. I thought with Vicky saying, have we got any more questions? Well, go on then, you do yours. I'll leave. There's something I want to talk to you about. Only, you know, like I say, you can promote it towards the end, so it's obviously it's for you.
Mine's obviously, I've been on your website, The Burials and Beyond, and loads of interest there. But the one that stuck out for me is obviously we live near Blackpool.
Amazing.
And the world's first, well,
that's another subject.
The world's first ghost train. Love this, the fact that straight away you said you adored the Haunted Mansion. And we are such fans. And the fact that people thought it was the first ghost train, but in actual fact it was at Blackpool Pleasure Beach.
So
again, it's just a connection, because obviously I saw Disney, Haunted Mansion, Blackpool. I thought, that reminds us of.
I love the Haunted Mansion. Love anything related to that. I've spent far too much money on Disney. I should
join
a gift card or a pair of mouse ears or something as thanks. But Blackpool in particular, that I think that's prime example of a place that people dismiss. I'm in the Northwest a lot, and so I love Blackpool because I love entertainment history. I'm really interested in music hall and variety, and so naturally Blackpool's like a mecca of that sort of history. Even like Warrington and Wigan, there's so much there, but so many people dismiss Blackpool. It's like, oh, it's just where people go on stag do's nowadays.
It doesn't.
It's got a reputation,
Whereas, you know, granted, it's not the most salubrious place in the world, but it's got so much amazing history. Some of the world's firsts were in Blackpool. Some of the most important entertainment events happened at Blackpool. You can trace back things that millions of people have enjoyed to Blackpool. And I think the ghost train being one of those things is wonderful. And I also think it's an absolute miracle that the ghost train still exists, because it seems like heritage rides on the pleasure beach are being ripped up 10 a penny, but let's
we used to love going with our kids. We used to, when you could literally walk in and pay per ride.
Yeah.
And then when they made it that you've got to have this ticket and wristband, we stopped going.
Yeah,
because
it
was
mounts
only
up as well,
3
doesn't it?
rides that people went on, so it's not value.
Yeah, because we used to go in one entrance, take our time, maybe a couple of hours, walk through, and then come out to the opposite side and, like I said, pay for the rides as
But
much as
then
you want.
they are also losing money
Yeah.
from people like us, because when we were there, we'd buy coffees, we'd buy sweets for kids.
Yeah.
We won't do that now because we're not going in.
But
Exactly. Yeah. When you got families, it's, I think now it's like 25. The cheapest was like 25 quid a ticket.
But
I mean, that's prohibitive, isn't it?
Well, it's funny how you mention about, I mean, when Vicky says we live close, we're about half an hour away, so it's not like we're not in Blackpool, we're closer to inland, if you will, near Blackburn, basically where we are, Blackburn, Blackburn, Bury, that area. But like Blackpool's going through a lot of changes now, and it's funny how you talk about how it's changing now, and the heritage is going. I mean, they're flattening loads of the old Victorian buildings. They're coming down left, right, and centre now for is it this big casino that they're trying to build? This route, you know, and I'm like, everywhere we look, all these buildings are being dropped, all these graveyards are becoming abandoned, or like you said, headstones are being removed. You know, they're putting car parks where graves are, and I'm like, you know, what's going on in the world? It's crazy.
It does seem that Victorian seaside towns in particular are kind of like the standard sacrifice for lots of councils. We look at the Victorian era as a bit too close to modern. It's not really important. It's not, you know, it's not Georgian, it's not Regency, it's not anything special. And so seaside towns get the brunt of it. You know, Blackpool has, well, Cleethorpes certainly has. You know, a lot of history's been lost because it's just seen as disposable. Yeah. Whereas actually the Victorians invented entertainment as we know it. They, you know, they had such a big hand in bringing the glory days, boomtown, to these coastal towns.
And I've just got two more. Your Instagram account. Why all my own teeth?
Because having my name would be too simple, wouldn't it? It used to be, I thought, as a way to compliment myself. I've always struggled to like kind of sell myself, and so this was years ago with my granny. I used to say, right, okay, what have I got going for me? Right, I've got all my own teeth. What else? Well, so it just stuck. It just stuck, all my own teeth. Yeah.
I thought there'd be a funny story behind it. That's why I thought I've got to ask.
Yeah, that is the greatest compliment I can give myself. So I've had to keep up very good dental hygiene.
You can always change it to not so my own teeth.
Yeah.
And I've just one more then. You love gothic clothing. You're a profound goth. Do you therefore go to every Whitby Goth Festival?
I used to. I try. I haven't gone to the last one. It's because the main event has changed hands. Well, certainly the permissions from the council to do the event. But I've been going to Whitby and Whitby Goth weekends and different incarnations pretty much twice a year, every year since I was about 14, 15. So I've loved that. I've really loved that because goth music, mopey music, and getting dressed up and flouncing about is a huge part of my life. But yeah, I run my own gothic event as well in Bristol. I run a gothic ball in a cemetery, which is terribly unbroken. That happens every October. So I try and create the event that my teenage self would have absolutely killed to go to. So yeah, anything large and gothy in the UK, I tend to try and get to it, and every now and again pop over to different countries for the experience as well. But I love it. Yeah.
Well, Vicky's brought down here Bristol Ball October. Now.
Before you go on then, the only thing is, books due out this year. Can we ask what?
Yes.
That was going to be my final question, but it don't matter. Go on, carry on.
Well, I'll leave you for that then. Okay, I'll go. Dolls.
Go on then.
Dolls at all?
What about them?
Just everybody seems to have this thing about dolls.
About all like haunted dolls
You
and
mean,
stuff.
you mean like the old Victorian style looking dolls?
Is this a
Yeah,
Well-
I don't have any doll. I don't really buy into the whole haunted doll thing, but that's probably because I live in a state of perpetual clutter. And I just don't have space for it.
It's
But I
funny,
do
isn't it?
like, yeah, I do like cursed objects. So
Yeah, no, but because I was on your website and you have all these different segments of different types of stories that you cover, and I saw one about, was it wax dolls?
that was, yeah,
I'm sure it was about wax. Was it wax
Yeah.
dolls? And
Yeah.
the link between the dead, and how they place dolls on graves and photographed them with the dead. I'm sure I read that today.
Yeah, it's a tiny thing. It wasn't widely done at all, but there was a
Right.
very small period of time in America primarily where some people would create very highly detailed wax dolls when they'd lost a young member of the family, and that would be part of their mourning process.
Right.
But yeah, there are very few in existence. And there isn't an awful lot of information out there about
No.
them, but they're a strange little Victorian curiosity.
Yeah, but this is what I love about your website and the work you do. And again, we'll put all links down
Yeah.
in the description box when this video is finally uploaded. But you cover so much interesting quirks and oddities in life, if you will, which I think are really fascinating. And I'm glad there's people like you doing these, because it's keeping, again, them stories alive. Because like I said,
Oh,
half of
thank
these
you.
things, or some of these things we've never heard of, have we?
Well,
And I think it's fascinating when like there's people like yourself still covering these stories. I think it's really, really
and
fascinating.
doing various different
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah, you're not stuck to like one niche.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
more.
Thank
know.
you. Yeah, I do get I'm constantly looking at something, constantly distracted. I'm like a magpie for dead things. So yeah, it's all under the same morbid umbrella, but there's no strict consistent thing.
Yeah. So
Go on.
the book. This is what we're going to leave till the end. You've got a book coming out late this year. This is what
Yeah.
we're led to believe. Is that kind of secret what it's about, or can you let us know what it's about?
I have the contract, the cover. I have a rough release date, but I don't have the solid release date yet.
Right.
But yeah,
okay.
my debut novel is due out imminently. As soon as I can say the date, I'll say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a Gothic novel. It's written in the Victorian tradition, but it's very neo-Gothic, and it's about spiritualism. Some unscrupulous, dodgy mediums coming into a family, and a very isolated family, and then the chaos that ensues. So it's kind of a good old-fashioned ghost story, but with a lot of intrigue, a lot of hoaxing, a lot of real. Is it real? Is something slightly more horrific happening? There's a lot of questions in it.
I gather then it's kind of loosely based on the research you've done over the years.
Yeah,
It's a fiction story.
it's a ghost story, but with a historical backing to it.
Yeah.
It's fast paced.
Yeah.
There's a lot of spooky goings on, a lot of scary goings on. So it's kind of half Gothic, half horror. But it's out soonish. And I'll be promoting it like hell.
Not now, because we're going over to the Rotherham HorrorCon next weekend. This coming Saturday.
Okay.
And they always have all, like people like yourselves who are interested in this line of work, but they always have a lot of authors, and they always do well, don't they, with debut novels?
Yeah.
They always seem to do really well. So you probably done all right there.
Well, I'm hoping. I've got a couple of non-fiction on the go, but because they're more academically angled, they're taking absolutely ages. But they'll be out in due time. But yeah, I'm keeping myself occupied
Brilliant.
in the meantime, and yeah.
So apart from obviously your book,
Mhm.
what else have you got planned for 2024? I presume you've got a lot more talks, such as the Dracula one, and so you're a busy person.
Yeah, I've got a lot of talks, a lot of spooky events. I'm doing a few paranormal conferences, I'm doing the ASSET conference in Winchester. I'm doing the Parameet Midlands and Parameet North. And what else am I doing? There's a Paracon in Bodmin in Cornwall, so I really am seeing the sights.
Yeah.
And throughout it all, I'm writing, I'm publishing, and I'm doing my podcast as well, which is called Loopholes, which is a it's a very intensely researched but a very light-hearted podcast that I co-host with Ian Boldsworth, and we have a good laugh talking to people in the paranormal, and also I try and present these fascinating stories of ghosts and aliens, and then he will very, very intelligently shoot me down. But it's a lot of fun, and we've got we've got a series on at the minute.
Is that a weekly podcast? I'm sure I've wrote that down.
Yes, yeah. Well, we're doing it in series at the minute because it's so intense.
Yeah.
That we're on series 2 at the minute. There's 40 episodes out from series 1, and now series 2 we're on episode 4 now of the new series. So yeah, you can get that wherever you get your podcasts, and it's a good laugh.
We'll put links, like I said, we'll put links down below, can't we?
Yeah.
So. And
is there any more Unexplained on Discovery you're doing?
Well, the last series just finished on Friday. So it's as far as telly things and public media, I've got a lot of fingers in a lot of pies, but I can't announce anything just yet.
Understand that.
Have you enjoyed doing that?
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. We were very much put on the spot. We didn't see any of the clips beforehand.
Right.
So I was honestly, I'd be so easy to murder. So they just said, let's go down to this. It was a monastery's crypt, and film you talking about ghosts. And I'm like, oh yeah, let me put my slap on and go down. So I'm not helping myself, but it was lovely. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to record. I've always said,
go on.
It's like you've been framed with ghosts.
Yeah.
Do you ever watch any of them and straight away sit there and think, what a loader?
Not what you've done, by the way, but others.
Oh yeah. I think they when I'm presented with something suddenly that I have a strong opinion on, I have a tendency to turn into a bit of a docker. So all the class, the facade just falls, and just expletives come out. So I think there's been some smashing editing on me over the years.
At least you're human.
Yeah. But Vicky's just like that, though. We'll be watching something, Nuke's Top 5. I shouldn't really be giving him a shout out, but Nuke's Top 5 on YouTube, and Vicky's had it. Oh, the rubbish! What? Oh, blah, blah. But we'll sit and watch it for half an hour.
Still watch it. It's entertaining.
It's entertaining, isn't it? Yeah.
Pulling apart, aren't we? It's it's crazy.
Yeah. The entertainment's not in the truth; it's in the process. Yeah.
I'm brilliant with that.
Right. So we'll say thank you very much, Kate, for joining us.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for having me.
Really appreciated it. I mean, it's been more of just a general chat more than an interview, hasn't it, really?
Yeah.
But no, honestly, we never take these things lightly, and we don't take them for granted. And yourself and all the other guests we've had so far, and I think we've got another 2 lined up next week. We've got, you probably know him well now, Kieran O'Keefe. He's coming on next 2 weeks, I think it is now. But we're really, really, honestly, we can't thank you enough for tonight and for general light-hearted chat. And like I said, we're going to be watching your career from afar, obviously. We're not stalkers, don't get me wrong.
Then again, maybe contacting you again for an update.
Yeah. We'll probably get in touch at some point. But like I said, we don't take it for granted, and we really, honestly, we can't thank you enough, for coming on tonight and having a light-hearted chat. Yeah. And what you do, keep doing it, because it's fascinating. It really is, and it's, for some people they might say it's morbid, but as I said, we've all got it in us. So, just want to thank you, seriously. It's been brilliant. And just thank you so much. Thank you so much.